Davey, thank you so much for coming by the sessions. We have these interviews and we bring people in, and I was excited to have you here. You are this rocker that just keeps going and just keeps at a very high standard of performance all the time. This is absolutely wonderful, man. Where did music all begin in your life? Where did music enter into your soul?
It probably entered, I was probably in there when I was born. I've got a strong belief that that's kind of what happens. You're either blessed with it or you're not. There are many music lovers, but not as many actual players.
Yeah.
And I think you're born with a passion, and you just don't know it until something happens. And I remember my very first introduction to, say, rock and roll was, I have two older sisters, 10 and 12 years older than me. And so when I was like 4 or 5, so we're looking at like 1955, I was hearing Elvis 78s, Jailhouse Rock.
That they were playing,
Hound Dog, their records and that. And I'm going, what is that? I love it. This is great. I want to do this. And I knew that, that it was killing me at that time. And I loved it. So I've always had this thing about, and I found out later on that this guitar player was Scotty Moore, who played with Elvis, and he just passed away, I think, last year, unfortunately. He was a huge influence because I loved that whole early Elvis, of what I call the good Elvis.
Yeah.
Because it went kind of weird. But that was definitely my first influence. And then growing up in Scotland, my parents were big music fans. They didn't play anything, but they would have music evenings where they'd invite people over who actually sang and played music. And we always had an upright piano in the house.
Wonderful.
And this guy called Ted Warwick would come by the house and sing like Scottish standards. And I mean, this is like a guy who would be in his 50s or 60s at the time. And this, again, is 50 or 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And he blew me away by the sound of this guy's voice in the room. And those kind of things were the things that were like, wow, he's doing it, so maybe I can, and I'd come back from a movie with my dad. We'd go see a movie every Friday night. And I'd come back from seeing The Vikings or something with Kirk Douglas. And I'd sit at the piano, da-da-da, and pick out the tunes, And so I knew, there's always been that thing.
Your ear was developing.
My ear was definitely, I was a sponge for everything. When I was 7, somebody came around our school classroom in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And it was remarkable, really. This person just said, okay, we have some space for some violin lessons. Who would like to learn to play violin? And my hand went like that. I mean, it was like there was a string on it or something. I didn't do it. My hand just went up like that. And okay. And they said, we'll take Davey, he's in. And me and 3 other people, I think. And they tested our rhythm skills and our, ear.
Listening skills, yeah.
And I played violin for 4 or 5 years and ended up in the Edinburgh Schools Orchestra. And so that was a great grounding.
So was that all classical music that you did? So it was all classical, so it was really formal study.
Very formal.
Music,
interesting. Quite rigid. Yeah. So it taught you, it was great for me to learn to read music, which I always urge kids to do, even though it might get lost along the way, depending on what you do with your career, if you're a player. It's great to have that knowledge. I mean, if I'm working, for example, with, say, somebody like James Newton Howard, who's a dear friend also, or Hans Zimmer, and they have a chart, at least I can look at it and go, oh, yeah, okay. I know roughly what you want here,
right.
From bar 43 to bar 62. A lot of people shy away from that or retreat from learning music, and that's a shame.
So having a formal foundation was extremely important. So that obviously
important
that carried over into guitar now. Now you start playing guitar.
Yeah, because I mean, I got tired of violin, and I was just starting to get into the Beatles and the Stones. I'd be like 12 years old by this time, and you know, anybody who hears Day Tripper or something,
Oh.
you know, the violin was here and then it went down here. And I started picking it up. And my sister, one of my sisters bought me a guitar, an acoustic guitar, for Christmas one year, and when I was like 11 and a half or something. And immediately because I'd been playing violin, so I got it, the concept of strings. I picked it up real fast. And I went to take lessons a few months after and found that I already knew more than the teacher. So I just thought, you know what, I'm just gonna, you know, listen to the radio. And in those days, obviously, you had to sit around the radio and wait for that song to come on.
Right.
You know, you couldn't just play it over again and slow it down and, you know, and learn the part. You had to wait for the song. You know, that's how I learned, by sitting in my room, listening to records, radio, being totally passionate.
So records, you started going out and buying some records, and you're at that time, the explosion of not only music from Britain, I mean, the British invasion was
massive.
Absolutely massive. So you're hearing this, you're listening. Were there any really favorite musicians, specifically musicians that you were listening to?
Absolutely. Yeah, when I was in my younger years of especially of playing guitar, Hank Marvin of The Shadows, the lead guitar player of The Shadows, who were a background group for Cliff Richards. Not so well known over here ever, because you had your own, you know, versions of that, like The Ventures and different people. But Hank Marvin was like a huge idol, and I've since met him a bunch of times and had lunch with him and talked to him, and never thought that would ever happen, you know. And so Hank was a huge influence. And then a few years later, I got more into the idea of getting deeper into guitar. So I bought another acoustic, reasonably good acoustic, and started listening to people like Bert Jansch and John Renbourn and John Martin and that stuff like that. The Incredible String Band, you know, really cool stuff. And I learned how to fingerpick, you know, which was, at first I could have sworn that it was two guys playing a part. I'm going, that's not one guy, you know. And then eventually it was like, if he uses his thumb for the bass part and the other fingers in combination, I get it. And I learned how to.
So this was self-taught then? No one really taught it to you?
No, I was self-taught.
That's a huge driving passion that you have to want to learn it. It's not easy, and you still made it happen.
Absolutely. And there wasn't a whole lot of money. I mean, our family was a working class, middle class, whatever you call it, family in Scotland. So they were kind of shocked to see me developing at this rate, because by the age of 13, I was getting asked to join bands that were in their 20s, you know. It was kind of weird. And I was kind of freaked out by it. I would say, well, why do you think I can work in your band? You know, I'm a school kid, you know, and you're men. You know, and they said, well, you're better than us. And I was like, okay, I'll join. And I must admit that the odd few quid here and there, pounds, dollars, whatever you want to call it,
starts to really inspire you.
That didn't hurt. When I saw that I could make some money out of it, it was great.
So you're starting now this professional career. Now, did this expand to other bands? Did you start thinking about as this kind of like as a business now that you wanted to? Well,
it became obvious to me. See, my major in school was art and English, so I was already in that kind of artistic thing. But even my art teacher, when he was going around the class one day asking the students, you know, what are you going to do when you leave school? And because most kids in Scotland at that time left school as soon as they could. You know, as soon as they were 15, they get their leaving certificate gone, you know. So what are you going to do when you leave school? And I said, well, I'm going to be a professional musician. And he said to me, don't be so silly. Don't be so stupid, boy, you know. And it was like, well, that's what I'm going to do, whether you like it or not. You know, I would take trips into the city, into Edinburgh, and there was one music store that I'd always go and I'd stare at this powder blue Stratocaster. And it was like, one day, you know, and now I've got like 5 of them or something. It's crazy. Yeah, I was in various folk groups because the folk revival was very big in those days, and that did me a lot of good because it led me to learn other instruments, banjo, mandolin.
Right.
There were two very big heroes for me in those days on the folk scene as such. One was a Scotsman called Archie Fisher, who's still working, still playing, and a brilliant singer, songwriter, guitar player, just great guy all the way around, and very, very encouraging. And I walked into his, he invited me to his apartment one night, and I walked in there, and he was sitting on a rug, a Persian rug with incense sticks going, playing the sitar. And I just went, oh, I got to get one of those, because I was just a freak for anything with strings on it. So a year or so later, I rustled up enough money to send off a check to Bombay, India, where they built me what was termed a professional Indian sitar. And it arrived another year later in a gigantic case, because they're big, in a case like a coffin, and I had to go down to London Docks and pick it up, because by then I'd left home, realizing that if I was going to try music, Scotland wasn't going to be the place where I would do anything, because there were very few record companies, in fact, maybe one.
Where did you see the opportunity?
Somebody at a folk club called Noel Murphy, funniest guy on the planet, Irish guy. We were, I just loved his music. He loved my playing, and he was playing at this club in Scotland that I was kind of part of this band that played there. And he made the mistake of saying, if you're ever in London, look me up. So, about 6 months later, I told my mom, and dad, I got to go, and I was 17. The deal was, I said, look, they were petrified, obviously. And I said, well, look, what about this? If I try for 2 years, and if I don't make it, I'll get a real job. I'll become a bank manager or something.
To get a real job.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
little did I know that I was going to be working harder than anybody on the planet. But and that was the deal, the rough deal. So I got on the train, and with £11 in my pocket, that's about $20.
Absolutely.
And knocked on my friend's door, who said, if you're ever in London, and he kind of said, what are you doing here? I said, well, you invited me. And he went, okay. So we became a duo, and he sang Irish traditional songs, and I played tenor banjo and guitar and mandolin. And it kind of went from there, and I got a reputation around town, around London, and started to get session work.
So how fast did that happen by the time you...
Pretty quick.
That's amazing.
Within about 6 months.
That's amazing.
One of the reasons being that not many people played mandolin and banjo that well, and nobody played sitar. I was like the guy. So I got a call from Gus Dudgeon, the late Gus Dudgeon, a wonderful record producer, and he produced a band called Magna Carta that I was working with at the time, and he was also producing a new singer-songwriter called Reg Dwight. And he said, look, Reg has got a session coming up. He hates being called Reg, by the way, so this is the last time I'll ever refer to him as that. But in those days, that was it. He just made a bit of a splash in this country, and back in England. He was kind of, people knew who he was vaguely, and that was about it. Yeah. And so Gus said, we're doing a new album with Reg, with Elton, and we've been looking for a guitar player to play this specific part on a song called Madman Across the Water. And they tried 2 or 3 other players, and it hadn't worked out. And I just found this out recently. It was Elton told me that a guitar player called Michael Chapman, who's a great acoustic guitar player, and he's still playing on the folk scene in Britain now. He had recommended me for the part.
How amazing.
He said, you want Davey for this part, So anyway,
and you found that out recently?
Yeah, I just found this out like a month ago. Elton told me.
Oh, that's great.
Because I always thought it was Gus, because he had produced me with other bands and he'd seen me playing.
Wonderful.
And anyway, he made the call, and I went in there, and there's all these heavyweight you know, Herbie Flowers on bass and Ray Cooper on percussion and Terry Cox on drums, and like great players. And I was like, oh my God, Paul Buckmaster doing all the string arrangements. So again, charts everywhere, you know, and I'm going, oh, this is going to be interesting. And I thought, one of the things that I thought immediately was, well, I can do this. And I think that's a big plus for people who are playing music.
Right.
If you have any doubt whatsoever, you're in the wrong game.
Right.
You should just know that you're going to go for it.
So self-confidence, but you were prepared. You had the training, you had the foundation,
Yeah.
you had the music studies, so you were prepared, so you had that self-confidence. So
Sure.
in order to get that self-confidence, what we're saying is you really have to prepare yourself and put the hard work into
Absolutely.
it. Interesting.
Absolutely. And it's extremely hard work. And although it's not really work, I didn't look at it as work because it was what I wanted to do.
It's love, it's enjoyment.
It's a passion, exactly. It's a calling. And the next day after that session with Elton, we did 3 tracks. We did Madman Across the Water, Tiny Dancer, and Leave On in the one day.
Right.
The following day, I got a call from his management saying, Elton would like to know if you'd like to join his touring band. And he wants to do more of a rock thing, just make a quartet. So it became Elton, Nigel Olsson on drums, Dee Murray on bass, and me on guitar and everything else.
Right.
Because in those days there weren't many keyboards. There was maybe a B3, an organ, you know,
Right.
Hammond organ,
Hammond B3,
a Mellotron, and a Farfisa organ.
Right.
That's kind of it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so I did all these overdubs on all the early albums. It was great. And so I became very busy very quickly. You know, we were making 2 and 3 albums a year in those days, where most bands nowadays take a little longer.
Absolutely.
And it's a different game.
It's a different game, but the recording scene years ago was very, very different too. I mean, how you recorded years ago. I mean, even just saying you did 3 songs in one day, that's also pretty amazing when you think about how it's done now.
Well, the thing is, we still do that now.
Yeah.
We still, I mean, the last time we were in the studio, the latest album, same thing.
But that's a great quality. That's old school, right?
It is old school, and it's real.
Yeah.
You're not like stressing or belaboring a part that really should just be left alone, or taking a mistake out that should be left in.
Yeah.
Because I think great accidents are a part of music. You know, I mean, you only have to listen to a Beatles album or a Stones album, a Rod Stewart record to hear tons of mistakes.
Absolutely.
And they all work because they're kind of all soulful, you know. So I'm a great believer in that, and great playing, yes, but also leave the mistakes and leave the hiss and leave the stuff that's a little bit odd.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it too much. Don't stress that. Where I think it's become a little bit too, for me, a little bit too linear again. It's very organized. It's almost like classical music again.
Yeah.
You know, it's like. Whereas back in the day, we were making records. It was like we'd show up in the studio, and it was your creativity and your playing ability that made the records
that
what
got
they
you
were.
through the actual song and what it was, as opposed to any specific plan. But how powerful. So were you organizing, you know, business-wise? Were you balancing the business side? Were you maintaining all these contacts, and you were networking? You were making, you know, you were traveling and touring. You're meeting more people.
Well, as soon as the Elton thing started, we got incredibly busy because, you know, he made it quite clear that what he wanted to do was be a star.
Right.
He wanted to be the biggest star there ever was, and he's pretty much achieved
Absolutely.
that. You know,
a few times over.
You know, unbelievable. But so he was doing all the interviews and all this stuff and getting up incredibly early and doing all that side of it. But at the same time, he was really looking after us business-wise. And I've always had somebody who I would go and say, well, this is what they're offering, and this is what it is, and here's a contract, and you know, it was all done.
So you really took care of business.
Yeah.
Which is great to hear, because in many cases, it's not done that way.
Well, it's not. And then later down the line, they'll get an Alan Klein. There could be a song there.
Absolutely.
But, you know, that's what happens. I mean, and everybody suffers. I mean, the Beatles suffered, and the Stones, and Barry, Sting got ripped off by Isaac. I mean, people get done in by people in business because they see a very naive, business-wise musician.
Yeah.
So it definitely helped me a lot to have some sense as to what I wanted.
And what do you think gave you the skills in business? Was that just
I think
from
it was
experience?
because I had too many kids when I was very young.
Oh, interesting.
It was
that's a great motivator.
It was a
Absolutely.
necessity.
Absolutely. You had to stay focused on bringing an income in. Absolutely.
Got to have a house. Got to have this. And, in fact, that was the first thing that I said to Elton's management when I said, well, I'll need a house. And those days I was living in an apartment like everybody else was. And it was like, well, I have to have a house. And okay, we can probably work that into the deal and, this kind of thing. So I was motivated by life itself, if you like. Yes. And also by having, elderly parents in Scotland. So the first thing that I was able to do when I had some money, when I had a chunk of money, was buy them a house.
Beautiful.
And it was the best feeling in the world. So not only was it a confirmation that I don't have to get a real job, but I'm working hard enough to do this and achieve this. And
how beautiful.
So that was a nice moment.
How beautiful. What do you think gives you the motivation to continue? Where does that motivation come for you to keep pushing as hard as you can and as much as you do in the touring and the writing and the playing? Where does that come from?
It really comes from that connection with the people who come along to see us. And it's because it's such a separate world. I mean, recording is one thing, but playing live, which is what we do most of the time, you really have to have a connection with the people. If you get on stage and you just stare down at your shoes and don't do anything and expect people to adore you, you're not going to be around very long, So we go out there with the intent of killing them, going out there and making them laugh, making them smile, making them cry, and also hopefully playing something different every night. That's what it's been for me. I never played the same solo twice in a row. I just don't do it. I mean, there's a couple of parts that people expect to hear, so you do them. Right. But if there's a solo break comes up, I never play the same thing twice. And most of our band is that way inclined. We like to stretch it, take it out to the limit, because Elton's very like that.
And Elton's like that because in many of the concerts that I've seen with Elton, he really sometimes, I see Elton 3-4 times in a row, you're not going to get the same show.
You're never going to get the same show.
He almost kind of like a jazz player. He's kind of like finds different things that really is intriguing and creative and spontaneous.
Yeah. It's frightening, actually. It's frightening.
It's wonderful. And think about, here you are on stage with these, touring on what you're doing. You say Elton in the same way we say Elvis. You only need one name, and you get it.
You get it,
You get the power of the career, the power of the movement of what that is.
That's true.
What does it feel like when you're on stage and you're playing and you're looking over and seeing that you've gone through this journey now with Elton all these years?
I know.
It must be an amazing feeling of just
it
satisfaction.
really is. It really is, because it's all been very heartfelt. It's all been wonderful and tragedy-filled, great things, awful things. It's been a life. It's been a life, and the great thing is it continues to be a life, because we're on. As friends, we're just on the same level. We just talk, but through the wonders of modern science, he's got his own kids now. Yeah. And he realizes, oh my God, all these years, you've had children. Yeah. And he's watched me he knows all my kids, He's actually terrified of Charlie, my 18-year-old piano playing nutcase, who's at USC, who's really great. And Elton loves his playing. He just...
Beautiful.
I think that's the thing, really, is that we're all music lovers. Elton's a big music lover. He's got a massive vinyl collection. Recently, in the last year and a half, 2 years, he started collecting vinyl again. And it's become quite a big thing again. His CD collection was just... forget about it. It was off the charts. But I don't know if he's even still got any. Now he listens to pretty much strictly vinyl.
But how beautiful that, vinyl gives a certain sound that I grew up with, and I still love it. And as pristine and as clean as digital and the CDs are, it's almost too clean.
It's too clean.
I like listening to the Beatles music on the old vinyl
Yeah.
stuff as opposed to the. So there's something there that old school feeling, that music. So it sounds like you guys are a family on the road. You've been through ups and downs. You pursue in what you're doing here. This young generation, as they watch this here and they see someone as profound a musician as you are and continue to be, in closing, what would you say, what kind of message would you leave this next generation? Now imagine these kids are watching this and they've admired you, they may have seen you in concert, they've listened to your recordings. What can you say to them that can give them some kind of a guidance or hope for them to tap into their passion? What can you say to them?
We've had a lot of young people come back or come to our shows not only people, our peers and people older than us, but over the years we've had their children come and their children.
The next generation as well,
And sometimes we get little kids who are, 6 or 7 in the front row with their parents or whatever, and they're just like spellbound, and that is what we love, the younger people coming back. Obviously not as, it's great that they're 6 or 7, but I mean, it's great to see the teenagers coming back and digging it, as much as they're loving going to Coachella, and because that's what my children do. My son just had a blast at Coachella, and my daughter went 3 years in a row, and she's in New York City now. But she's learned so much from my life in music, and I've taken her on tour with me. I've taken my son on tour. I think that the main thing is not to be intimidated. A lot of kids give up early because their piano player maybe intimidates them, or the whole idea of reading music in an orchestra intimidates them. You know what, this is too much, I can't do this. You have to really find out what your part in all this is, if you're a player, and follow it out to the hill, because something amazing is going to happen. I mean, I know kids now who are, for example, I have a 12-year-old, he's my youngest, and he's a wonderful singer. And some friends of his, and maybe just a little bit older, are great musicians on a different level. And I've seen them progress since they were 5 or 6 years old. And I've always said to them, here, play this, and let's have a jam. And because that's another thing, I love jamming with kids. It's if you can actually teach them, show them that this Eminem track is actually the same as this Beatles track. It's exactly the dead same. I was playing Why Don't We Do It in the Road from the White Album. And I said, you know what this is? This is Lose Yourself by Eminem. Oh, what you mean, Dad? And then I went, okay, stop it. And I put on Why Don't We Do It in the Road? Dum, dum, ba, dum, 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 ba, dum. And then I put on Eminem, dum, dum, ba. They're going, oh, and they get that it's the same thing. Not a whole lot has changed in music. I think the one good thing that's changed, and that I would like to see young people pursue, is the pure love of it. And as I said earlier, not to be intimidated or afraid of it. Go for it.
Go for it.
Because what do you got to lose?
Think about it. If you think about your career and what you've done and what you've continued to do, you've made this dream a reality. This is powerful. That's a powerful message for this generation to see that, listen, it can be done. You're living proof of it. You're continuing to do it. You love it every day. It has been a calling. You followed it. You are passionate about what you do. You are dedicated. You're not afraid to put in the hard work to make it happen. You're still researching. You're still learning. You're still growing. This is a powerful message that you have done, Davey, in your life and your career.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely powerful.
I hope it carries on. It's definitely working with my own kids, so let's see what happens with the rest of the planet. I hope they're willing to put in the hard work.
That's what we're asking. I hope they're willing to put in the hard work. That is fantastic. On behalf of the Sessions, Davey, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Your talent, all of it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.